Thank you, Annette, Dorothea, and Suzanne. Some very interesting observations, and I think a very important piece of research there that I think has some very important implications for teacher education in general. So that's great. Some very, very important points that have been raised. There are a number of questions already in the chat, and I will pick up on them as we progress. The first one, and possibly to both Dorothea and Suzanne, really, is that could you provide a bit more contextual information about the studies, the research, about the curriculum, the framework? So I think people were interested to know a bit more about the context in which your research took place and so on. Could you respond to that one, please?
Yes, maybe I start. In my study, or the question is especially about the sample when I see the chat. So I had teachers from very different backgrounds. First of all, I looked for teachers with a particular interest in global education and global learning. And then to get a contrasting picture, I also looked for teachers who had no relation or no special focus on global learning. For example, teachers who just teach global issues because they are teachers of geography and they had a connection to global issues, but which taught in schools with no special projects and who themselves did not have a specific focus or knowledge about global learning or education for sustainable development. So I had a very broad sample with teachers from very different backgrounds. Teachers taught especially geography and biology and subjects with a social focus. But I also had some teachers with who taught natural studies like biology, chemistry and stuff. So there was a big focus on a subject with a social perspective in the sample. Yes.
Okay, from my sample with a group discussion of teacher students, there's a broad range of different stages of the study in the university as in regard to the subjects they are doing. These are class teachers, these are subject teachers from arts, from humanities, from social sciences, and even some courses within educational science. So we covered all the teacher students available in Bamberg, and even some groups not doing teacher student but different pedagogic studies or are involved in cultural or political self-organized groups within and outside the university. So the comparison is really on a broad angle. So
okay, thank you. There was a sort of a related question to that, which you partially answered, which is about what subjects did you covered, so and also if you could sort of develop that a bit by asking, did you see any differences in responses from teachers depending on the subject they were trained to be teachers in, and was it the same regardless of subject areas?
Yeah, this is one thing I just came to my mind to add. In my study, I saw that many, how can I say, teachers from this third world perspective who had been engaged in development education and development topics, it's difficult to say, but there is a tendency towards first and second type. So very an idea of solidarity, of bringing forward a specific perspective on the world and how you can change and develop the world. But it's difficult because, of course, the sample was very small. So this is just one tendency I saw in the data I had.
For my sample, there are no tendency related to a special subject or course. Even students taught in the area of didactics for second language learners are very spread over the different types. But there is a tendency in regard to the inner diversity of the groups. if we have group discussions among teacher students who are from very different backgrounds and with very different areas of field, even outside of the university, then it has a tendency to be more discursive and more open-minded than other groups who are more homogeneous.
And were there differences depending on where teachers were trained? Did you see any evidence of that?
No, we didn't.
You didn't?
So, I mean, our sample was not, it's always a question, which region do you cover? We did have, of course, from the region across where we are, but there was not depending from institutions or special classes or special courses.
Okay. There's an interesting question. Have you looked into how we can develop teachers' beliefs in this area? It's a question about moving forward and taking it forward, which is quite a big question. Who wants to respond to that first? Okay, and then I'll ask the others for their comments.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Susanne said at the end. This is now the next research we need to do. We started to have it, and we started with some preliminary research by doing different kinds of training and having a look how this change. But this is what we now will address much more deeper, these beliefs, and try by this to see whether this makes a change. But that's the next step.
Anything else, Dorothy or Suzanne, you want to add to that, or is that okay in terms of response?
Oh, that's great. That's the point.
Can I ask sort of a more general question, which is in terms of how you see, you've mentioned about the backgrounds and experiences of the teachers and so on. Is there any connection between other factors in terms of their social cultural backgrounds and so on that you even considered? Also, in some piece of research, were there any differences in terms of gender or ethnicity? Those sort of questions. And I think that there's often an issue that emerges when you're doing research of this nature. It's when you're looking at the context and the background of the people you're interviewing, their own sort of personal journeys and what have been the factors that have influenced their personal journeys. So for example, I'm aware of similar research done in the UK that some of the most engaged teachers in global learning have been those that have experienced working overseas in other countries, particularly in the third world. And I'm just interested to know that sort of contextual factors of the backgrounds of individual teachers. And I'm aware that some people have done some research almost in looking in depth, almost like the biographies and the personal journeys of individual teachers. And I just wondered if that was something you thought about in relationship to your research.
The interesting point is that, of course, we had these kind of teachers in our sample, but as Dorothea was saying, these had been not always those who had been teaching in the way then we would have expected in regard to complexity. So what our research is not stable in this point, because this would need another strategy to look after. But the hypothesis coming from the research is that the most important is not the experiences you have, but the most important is how these experiences are brought into a guided professional reflection. So not the experience count alone, but it is the form how you are reflecting it, and not only as a person by writing diary, but in a professional way. And I think this is something which needs to be reflected more. What does it mean to make teacher training with the biography of persons by bringing the biography in a new stage of professionalizing and professionality?
Thank you.
I could add one example to this, that there are a lot of students now being abroad for 1 year. There's already a kind of technical term, the gap year, being all over the world and helping there. And for example, this essentialistic understanding of culture has no change and no connection to these experiences. It's really the question how you deal with your experiences, how you reflect on them. And on the one hand. On the other hand, we can't change the biographies of people, and we won't like to do this, but to have a more reflective dealing with them, that would be probably very important.
Sure, sure. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Go on, Dorothy.
Maybe in addition to that, I mean, it's only a very small insight, but I had a seminar on professional beliefs in the field of global learning, and I tried to establish more reflection procedures when we were talking about our own biographical background. And that was, or at least what I saw was that it's really difficult to start reflecting your own biographical background. So it's not an easy thing. And this is only like the first step to changing maybe your professional beliefs about global learning.
Okay, thank you. So two last questions we'll take. What the slightly more general questions. One was about the relationship with school, the leadership within the schools, and the direction and dispositions of leaders in this area and within the educational organizations. That might be difficult for you to answer, but there's certainly, as we know, the school context, the context of the leadership within the school is very important in terms of the extent to which teachers' own professional beliefs are able to be articulated and presented. Was that something you were conscious of in terms of your research?
We had been conscious of it, but it was not focus of our research.
Yeah. But it's an area that that is obviously clearly important.
Of course, because I mean, this is how then teachers are accompanied during their life history, and that is very, very important to have their reflective environment where this is possible. Yes.
And the last area was around obviously the impact of COVID and the pandemic. And could you just clarify when your research was been taking place and the extent to which the recent events of the past 18 months have had an impact upon your research?
The data collection was finished before the pandemic.
Okay.
Yeah, so the interpretation and the writing was affected, but not the data per se.
Okay, and is there anything from what you've picked up since that would have an impact upon sort of research in this area from the COVID pandemic in terms of online courses and things like that? Is that something?
I think this is what is very important, that this, of course, reduces the possibility of shared reflection and deeply working on professional beliefs or on beliefs at the, not only professional beliefs, but worldviews and beliefs. So it is much more knowledge. So I think deep learning needs much more personal encounters. Okay.
Thank you. There's time just for one last question, which was quite an important one. Can you possibly elaborate a little more on type 4 of your typologies and teaching and learning transformative simulation by self-reflexivity and learning arrangements? Are you referring to pedagogical approaches and reflexivity as a tool and approach to use in learning engagements? Are teachers being used to use this? Are teachers developing their own self-reflexivity?
Yeah, maybe I try to make that more clear. I think it is important to differentiate that reflexivity is not only a method in learning environment, but it's the aim. So that the aim is not a specific perspective you got by reflecting on something, but the reflexivity is the tool, or is not only the method, but also the aim, that the students are able to see different perspectives and to start a discussion and to maybe to prioritize what they would find important to take into account, and then find acting strategy. But this is a reflexive process, so that it's not only a method but also the aim of the teaching or of the learning process.
Okay, great. So thank you, Annette. Thank you, Suzanne. Thanks, Dorothea. That was great. A very informative and a very important presentation. And I see that you're working on some publications from your research. Is that right? So we look forward to hearing more about them. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. We haven't got a lot of time left, but I'd like to just take sort of 3 sort of question areas to pick up on, and go to you first, Cadissa. What was the question about asking about examples of engagement? So, for example, are there examples from the sort of ESD themes? Karen asked, what examples of ESD themes were being successfully integrated? Can you give other examples of particular themes or elements of ESD that have been successful?
Well, the data which we have collected until now, it didn't actually show if those, the way they were integrating different themes, that was really successful or not. I didn't get any response to this thing. But yes, I can mention that there are already 3 published studies from Pakistani context where teacher educators, in fact, integrated something, and it was successful. They integrated undergraduate research and then collaborative reflection. So these have been found useful in Pakistani context. But in this particular study, the success thing has not been mentioned by the teacher educators. Yeah.
Thank you. This is a question for Ben. That by using focus on competencies, could this be used as reproducing neoliberal and liberal humanist orientations and not space for critical reflections? And is that something you've been looking at?
I think it's a really good point, and it's something with my colleagues that we've discussed. I mean, in particular around sort of with the attributes that are mentioned within the table that I shared, there's the informed choices, and it's not quite clear whether they're individual choices or connected to a sort of wider collective. The same around rights and responsibilities, about whether it's an individualization of issues. So yeah, it's a really important point.
Okay, thank you, Rita. Monica, and almost as the last one to bring it all together, there's quite a lot of comments about interdisciplinarity and in-service training and teaching. And I just wondered the question from your own experiences in the Portugal context and also for the SIG in general, the extent to which you might, are these some of the themes that you might be picking up on? Because there's a question about distinction between pre-service and in-service, and also because as everyone's been saying this afternoon, that these are not, this engagement with global education, global citizenship education, not something that can just be done over 1 year. It's a lifelong process. Yeah. So I was wondering if there was something you've been thinking about, because that clearly is an area we need to consider more of.
Yeah, of course, there's a lot of research on pre-service teachers, not that many on e-service teachers, but we have seen from these presentations that there are some common themes that come out, some common struggles that pre-service and in-service teachers face when dealing with global citizenship, education for sustainable development, or global learning. We can see, and just to try to summarize some of the key ideas that have resulted from this seminar, which is, I know that some of you have already left, but perhaps you can pick up the recording after on and just pick up where you left. And I can see that this presentation has left us a lot of food for thought. Particularly what we have seen is that global citizenship education, education for sustainable development seem to be unquestionable at this time and date. And they have been introduced in curricula, policy documents, to some extent also in teacher education standards, but there is a gap still related with the successful and sustainable implementation. So this is still an issue. We see that teachers are fundamental in making social change happen, in educating for global citizenship, global learning, and sustainability. And we see that they are motivated and eager to do this. They want to do this, but they don't know how to do it. So some of the stumbling blocks that we have seen coming from all these presentations are, for instance, the preconceptions, their beliefs, so their experiences, and the perceived complexity of these themes, and also the lack of institutional support come from all our presentations, Ben, Kadia, and myself. So we can see that in order perhaps to move ahead, move forward, either in implementation or also some possible avenues for research, we can there's a need to focus on teachers' beliefs, on teachers' preconceptions by including reflexivity. And also I noticed that someone in the chat used the word action research, which is it has been quite effective in helping teachers reconsider and also see how can they implement this and do this in practice. We have also seen that there is a need to integrate GCESD into institutional culture. So to have the support from the peers, from the people you are working with, to see that there is something that is valuable that you want to do. Also, the relevance of collaborative work between teachers and teacher educators, between universities, schools, NGOs. So this means that fragmented effort and isolated activities will not do the trick of helping you implement and go forward with integrating global citizenship education or sustainable development. There's also the importance of promoting dialogue, of promoting partnerships, and of seeing effective interventions, of seeing things in action, things that have worked and can be useful. I do not like the word good practices, but something that we can see that has worked in a particular context, of course, but we can possibly adapt it and in our own context. And finally, I would like to leave something about the relevance of communities of practice, the relevance of building capacity for teachers and teacher educators, and also the use of communities of practice as spaces where you can promote a stronger commitment of relevant stakeholders in teacher education. So bringing teacher educators, teachers at different stages together, and also in partnerships with other institutions and organizations. And that is actually what this SIG is about. So bringing people that have different interests, different research interests, and possibly opening up the SIG to other people that are not teachers and researchers themselves.